All right, welcome back. This mini lecture is going to talk about 5 key points that we need to know for the Spanish-American War. So the first of this will be the main. The second will be logistics. The third will be 3 big campaigns that the American military is involved in. So one of these is in Cuba, the other is in Puerto Rico, and the third is the Philippines. All right. So first, the Spanish-American War gets going in 1898, and it lasts the majority of that year. There's a few reasons for this. One, an American ship is blown up or blows up in Havana Harbor in early 1898. Now, before this, a newspaper had run part of a letter, supposedly from a diplomat of Spain, trashing the United States. So the two coupled together, and in an era of what was referred to as yellow journalism, views run pretty high here. There's a lot of panic, a real sense that, well, obviously it must be, saboteurs that did this. One thing sort of leads to another, and there's a public outcry for war with Spain. Now, once war is declared, the United States military begins mobilizing for the conflict. Now, the United States military had not ramped up to a size anywhere comparable to this since 1861, 1862. And by the end of the Civil War, the United States Army is about 1 million men. So the U.S. Army is going to go to over nearly a quarter of a million soldiers within a few months, and this is going to be a very difficult process to happen. And so when the United States military begins deploying here, the logistical quagmire that they find themselves in is fairly massive. This is partly brought on by where the United States is going to be attacking Spanish forces. So there are Spanish forces in Cuba, there are Spanish forces in Puerto Rico, there are Spanish forces in the Philippines. An invasion of Cuba and Puerto Rico from the United States in 1898 would involve sending soldiers on rail lines down to ships off of Florida to then take them down to stage invasions. The rail traffic there infrastructure was light, there wasn't much there, and so there were quite a lot of logistical backups here and old supplies and sort of that kind of thing. So even though the U.S. is successful here, they're not doing themselves any favors as far as logistics are concerned. All right, so third, the United States military executes at least 3 separate invasions of varying size and scope sort of during this war. The first being in Cuba, where the landing was relatively unopposed, but Spanish forces and other forces will put up a fight against the Americans for a short period of time. Secondly, the Americans will also land in Puerto Rico, but by and large, the forces there didn't really wish to engage the Americans in open conflict, so again, that was further limited. Perhaps the most famous story with all of this, of course, is Theodore Roosevelt's charge of the Rough Riders of San Juan Hill. But in Cuba, but again, this is in some ways more myth, than anything else. Now, the real major outcome with a lot of this is, of course, going to be the Philippines. So when the U.S. Will land forces in the Philippines, Filipino forces had already mobilized against Spanish colonial leadership and had sought to push them out and had hoped that they would achieve independence as a result of all of this. Of course, the Americans tell them not exactly, and really from the ending period of this war, you will see the beginning of an insurrection on the part of the Filipinos against the American occupation of the Philippines. And this is referred to in different ways. It's referred to as the Philippine Insurrection. But the brutal treatment on the part of the American military against the Philippines and the Filipino people here it's pretty heady. They're fighting a counterinsurgent war against an insurgent Filipino force led by a guy by the name of Emilio Aguinaldo. This is a conflict that lasts for the next few years after 1898, after the war ends, after the treaty, after the acquisition of territory on the part of the U.S., where the U.S. acquires Puerto Rico, the U.S. acquires a number of other territories, and creates the concept of territories. So this is going to be a bloody conflict in which hundreds of thousands of Filipino civilians are going to lose their lives. So although the Spanish-American War is a largely forgotten conflict in much of the U.S. due to the fact that the First World War and American entry into it would occur, about 18, 19 years later. For many in these areas that are affected by this, of course, it is a very important, particularly in Puerto Rico, it's a very important event. Thanks so much.